November 18, 1944. 9:47 p.m. Prenzlauer Berg District, Berlin, ***. The air raid siren begins as it always does, a mechanical wail rising over the rooftops, bouncing off the brick facades of apartment blocks that have stood since the Kaiser's time. 52-year-old Margret Schroeder pauses at her kitchen sink, hands still wet from washing the evening's dishes. Her daughter, Anna, 16 years old and still in her Bund-Deutscher Mädel uniform from the afternoon civil defense drill, looks up from the table where she's been writing a letter to her brother stationed somewhere in Hungary. "Not again," Anna says, but there's no fear in her voice. "Not yet. They've done this 200 times before. Maybe more." The sirens, the descent into the cellar, the waiting. Sometimes the bombers pass overhead toward other targets. Sometimes the flak batteries thunder and shake dust from the ceiling beams. Sometimes nothing happens at all except the cold and the waiting and the all-clear that comes before midnight. Margret dries her hands on her apron. Through the window, she can see her Dietrich from the third floor already hurrying across the courtyard toward the shelter entrance, his wife pulling their youngest son by the hand. The street lamps have been dark for years, but the city isn't black. There's always ambient light from somewhere, the glow of a distant factory, the moon when clouds permit. "Bring the blankets this time," Margret tells her daughter. "It's cold down there." They gather their things with practiced efficiency. Anna folds the letter, tucks it into her pocket. Margret pulls 2 wool blankets from the chest, grabs the small leather satchel that contains their identification papers, ration cards, a photograph of Anna's brother in his Wehrmacht uniform, another of Anna's father who didn't come back from France in 1940. Outside, the November wind cuts through the courtyard. Other families emerge from doorways. The Kohlers, the elderly Braun couple, young Frau Weber with her infant, her husband somewhere on the Eastern Front. Everyone moves with the tired rhythm of routine. This is the 10th raid warning this month. Berlin has been bombed before, of course. The RAF came in 1940, scattered raids, more symbolic than destructive. But that was 4 years ago. 4 years of victories, of Wochenschau newsreels showing German tanks rolling across Europe, of promises that the Luftwaffe controlled the skies, that the Reich's enemies were being crushed on every front. The shelter beneath the apartment building smells of damp concrete and unwashed bodies. 43 people crowd into a space designed for 30. Someone has hung a portrait of the Führer on the far wall, beside a red flag with the swastika. Herr Becker, the block warden, 61 years old with a limp from the First War, stands near the entrance with his clipboard, checking names. "Everyone inside," he announces, voice carrying authority he earned in the trenches of Verdun. "Quickly now." Margret and Anna find their usual spot on a wooden bench along the western wall. The infant begins to cry. Someone coughs, a wet, rattling sound that echoes. The single electric bulb overhead flickers, dims, holds steady. Then they hear it. Not the usual distant rumble of flak batteries. Not the high, thin whistle of a single bomber engine passing overhead. This is something else entirely. Something new. It begins as a vibration felt more than heard, a deep, sustained tremor that seems to rise from the earth itself. Then the sound arrives and it doesn't stop. It grows. A continuous, thunderous roar that builds and builds until the concrete walls themselves seem to hum with it. Hundreds of engines. Maybe 1,000. Anna's hand finds her mother's. For the first time in 4 years of war, Margret sees genuine fear in her daughter's eyes. Mutti asterisk, Anna whispers. "What is that?" Herr Becker has frozen near the entrance, his face gone pale in the weak light. The portrait of the Führer rattles against the wall. Dust begins to sift down from the ceiling in thin streams. The sound grows louder. Impossibly louder. It's not just bombers passing overhead, it's a sustained assault on the senses, a mechanical apocalypse that drowns out everything else. Someone starts praying. The infant's crying can no longer be heard beneath the roar. Then the first bombs fall. The earth convulses. The light goes out. In the darkness, someone screams. The building above them groans, a sound like a living thing in pain. Another explosion, closer this time, and the concussion wave hits the shelter like a physical blow. Margret feels it in her chest, in her teeth, in the spaces between her ribs. More bombs. The sound is continuous now, a rolling thunder that doesn't end, can't end, will never end. Each explosion overlaps the next. The walls crack, she can hear the concrete splitting. Someone is sobbing. The air tastes of dust and fear. Above them, Berlin is burning. And in the absolute darkness of the shelter, holding her daughter's trembling hand, Margaret Schroeder understands with sudden, terrible clarity that everything they've been told for the past 5 years has been a lie. The bombing continues for 37 minutes. In the shelter, time loses meaning. There is only the darkness and the thunder and the trembling earth. Margaret keeps counting the seconds between explosions, but they come too fast, overlapping, merging into a single continuous roar punctuated by the sharp crack of direct hits somewhere above. She thinks of her son, Klaus, 19 years old and fighting in Hungary. She wonders if he's already dead. She wonders if they're all about to die. The air grows thick with dust. Someone near the back is hyperventilating. Frau Weber's infant has gone silent. Whether from exhaustion or something worse, Margaret can't tell in the darkness. Her Becker tries to maintain order, his voice cutting through. Stay calm. The walls will hold. They always hold. But even he doesn't sound convinced anymore. Another explosion, close enough that the blast wave slams the metal door inward. Someone shrieks. Margaret feels Anna's fingernails digging into her palm. She pulls her daughter closer, wraps both arms around her, and presses her face into Anna's hair. She smells smoke now, acrid and chemical, seeping down from above. It's going to be all right, Margaret whispers and knows she's lying. The Wochenschau newsreels played every week at the cinema. German fighters swarming Allied bombers, Luftwaffe aces racking up kills, flak batteries turning the sky into an impenetrable wall of steel. The radio broadcasts promised that Berlin's defenses were the most sophisticated in the world. The enemy may try, the announcers said in their confident voices, but they cannot touch the Reich's heart. The building shakes again. Somewhere above, glass shatters in cascading waves. The roar of the bombers hasn't diminished. If anything, it's growing stronger. Wave after wave after wave. How many are there? Someone asks in the darkness. No one answers. Margaret thinks back to 1940, to the scattered raids when the RAF first tried to reach Berlin. A dozen planes, maybe 2 dozen. The flak drove them off. Damage was minimal, a few buildings, some fires quickly contained. The newspapers ran triumphant headlines. Asterisk enemy terror flyers repelled. Berlin stands unshaken. Asterisk. She remembers believing it. They all believed it. In 1941 the victories came like clockwork. Poland, France, the Balkans, the first months in Russia when it seemed the Red Army would collapse in weeks. Klaus had been 15 then, already eager to join, already wearing his Hitler Youth uniform with pride. Her husband was already gone, but she'd convinced herself his death meant something, that the sacrifices would lead to the promised new Europe, the 1,000-year peace. By 1942 the newsreels were still showing victories, but the casualty lists grew longer. The rations grew smaller. Still, the radio promised, asterisk, the Bolshevik will be crushed. The Anglo-American gangsters will be driven from the skies. Final victory approaches star. In 1943 after Stalingrad, though they didn't call it a defeat, only a strategic withdrawal, the tone shifted. Goebbels spoke of total war, of sacrifice, of will triumphing over material superiority. The bombers came more frequently then, hitting the industrial cities, Hamburg, Cologne, the Ruhr. But never like this. Never with this weight, this totality. They told us we were winning, someone says in the darkness. It might be her Dietrich. The voice is thick with something between rage and despair. The bombing continues. 40 minutes now. 50. Margaret's legs are cramping from crouching. Her back aches. Anna has stopped trembling and gone rigid instead, a different kind of terror, the numbness that comes when fear exceeds the body's capacity to express it. Through the thunder, Margaret hears a new sound, the sharp crack of the flak batteries firing. The 88mm guns positioned throughout the city, the ones that were supposed to make Berlin untouchable. They're firing, yes, but it doesn't matter. The bombs keep falling. The flak doesn't stop them. Can't stop them. How many bombers does it take to produce this sound? Margaret tries to imagine it. 50? 100? She remembers seeing a single bomber once, back in 1940, caught in searchlights over Charlottenburg. It looked small, fragile, impossibly far away. This isn't one bomber. This isn't 10. This is a mechanical tide, an airborne army that has turned the night sky over Berlin into a killing floor. Asterisk Gott im Himmel asterisk, someone whispers. They can do whatever they want to us. It's Herr Becker who says it. The block warden, the veteran of Verdun, the man who wore his party pin with pride and lectured about duty and sacrifice. His voice cracks on the last word. In the darkness, Margaret feels the final strand of belief snap inside her chest. All the promises. All the parades and flags and speeches about invincibility. All the newsreels showing German might, German superiority, German destiny. All the time she'd convinced herself that Klaus would come home to a victorious nation, that her husband's death hadn't been meaningless, that the privation and fear and loss were building toward something greater. Lies. All lies. The Reich isn't invincible. The Luftwaffe doesn't control the skies. The enemy isn't being crushed. The enemy is here, directly overhead, untouchable and unstoppable, turning the capital into rubble while the vaunted defenses do nothing but make noise. Another massive explosion, the closest yet. The shelter's metal door buckles. Someone is praying in a high, desperate voice. Vater unser im Himmel *. If they can do this to Berlin, Margaret thinks they can do it anywhere. To any city. To everyone. Which means Germany has already lost. The bombing finally stops at 10:41 p.m. The silence, when it comes, is almost worse than the noise. Ears ringing, hearts hammering, 43 people pressed together in absolute darkness, waiting for the all-clear that doesn't come. Waiting to learn if the building above them still stands. Waiting to see if they're buried alive. Becker's flashlight finally clicks on, the beam cutting through the dust-choked air. His hand is shaking. "Stay here," he says. "I'll check the exits." But when he opens the metal door, smoke billows in, thick and black and choking. Someone starts coughing. The smell hits them, burning wood, burning rubber, burning things that shouldn't burn. Margaret stands, her legs barely supporting her. She keeps Anna behind her as they move toward the door. Through the smoke, she can see the stairwell. It's still there. The building hasn't collapsed. They climb toward the surface, toward whatever remains of their world. The courtyard is gone. Not damaged. Not partially destroyed. Gone. Where there had been cobblestones and a small garden plot where Frau Kohler grew potatoes, there is now a crater 15 feet deep, still smoking. The blast has peeled away the entire eastern face of the building across from theirs. Margaret can see directly into the Muller's apartment on the 3rd floor, or what remains of it. A kitchen table still stands, impossibly intact, with chairs arranged around it as if waiting for a family that will never return. The wallpaper shows a floral pattern, pale blue roses. One wall is simply absent, opening the room to the night air like a dollhouse. The Mullers are dead. All 4 of them. Margaret knows this without being told. She steps into the courtyard, Anna close behind her, and looks up. The sky glows orange. Not from searchlights, from fire. Berlin is burning in every direction. Columns of smoke rise so thick they blot out the stars, twisting together into a single black mass that seems to swallow the heavens. The air tastes of ash and chemicals and things she doesn't want to identify. Other survivors emerge from the shelter behind them. Frau Weber clutches her infant. The child is breathing, thank God, just stunned into silence. Herr Dietrich stands at the crater's edge, staring down into it as if he might find answers in the smoking earth. His wife is crying but making no sound, tears cutting clean lines through the dust on her face. From somewhere to the north, another explosion echoes across the city. A delayed action bomb or perhaps a fuel depot finally cooking off. The sound rolls across the rooftops like thunder. "My God," Anna whispers beside her. "Look at it all." Margaret does. In every direction fires. Hundreds of them. Maybe thousands. The glow is so intense it creates a false dawn, turning the night into a hellish orange twilight. She can see the silhouette of the Kaiser Wilhelm Memorial Church 6 blocks away, or half of it. The spire is gone, snapped off like a broken tooth. Herr Becker emerges last from the shelter, still carrying his clipboard. He looks at the devastation at the burning city and his face, already aged by the Great War, seems to collapse inward. The clipboard slips from his fingers, clatters on the broken stones. "They said this couldn't happen," he says to no one in particular. "They promised us." Margaret thinks of those promises now, all of them cascading through her memory like falling dominoes. 1933, *, we will restore Germany's greatness. We will overturn the humiliation of Versailles Star. She believed it. After the poverty of the Depression, after the chaos of the Weimar years, the promises of order and strength and national pride had felt like water in a desert. 1936, the Olympics. Berlin gleaming and confident, showing the world German efficiency, German power. The Rhineland remilitarized and the French did nothing. See, the propaganda said. The old powers are weak. Germany rises star. 1938, Austria welcomed the Anschluss, or so the newsreels claimed. The Sudetenland returned to the Reich. Chamberlain's appeasement. Peace for our time, the British said, but it looked like surrender. It looked like the world bending to German will. 1939, Poland crushed in weeks. The Wehrmacht unstoppable, a perfectly coordinated machine. Then the quiet winter, the Sitzkrieg waiting. Margaret had hoped it might end there, that the territorial ambitions were satisfied. 1940. France fell in 6 weeks. 6 weeks. The nation that had fought Germany to a standstill for 4 years in her father's war, that had bled at Verdun and the Somme, collapsed like a house of cards. The newsreels showed German soldiers marching down the Champs-Élysées. Her husband died in that campaign, but the victory seemed so total, so absolute, that his death felt like part of something historically momentous. The cost was terrible, yes, but the Reich was invincible. The propaganda wasn't lying. Look what we've achieved. 1941. Yugoslavia, Greece, the opening of Barbarossa. The maps showed arrows driving deep into Soviet territory, cities falling, millions of Red Army soldiers captured. By December, German units could see the spires of Moscow. The Bolshevik colossus is on the verge of collapse, the radio announcers proclaimed. Final victory by Christmas. But Christmas came and went. The Wehrmacht didn't take Moscow. The winter counteroffensive drove them back. 1942. The newsreels stopped showing maps with arrows. They showed individual battles, heroic stands, tactical victories. The word Stalingrad began appearing more frequently. Then it disappeared entirely for weeks. Then came February 1943, and the carefully worded announcement of the Sixth Army's sacrifice at Stalingrad. Not a defeat. A sacrifice. 300,000 men killed or captured, described in the language of martyrdom rather than military catastrophe. Margaret remembers the day Klaus enlisted, May 1943, 17 years old and lying about his age. She tried to stop him. He'd looked at her with absolute certainty. Mother, if every man thought only of himself, the Reich would fall. We fight for Germany's future. For Germany's future. That's what they all said. That's what the posters proclaimed, what the Hitler Youth instructors taught, what Goebbels screamed in his speeches. Asterisk hold fast. Believe. Will triumphs over material star. 1943, Hamburg firebombed, 40,000 dead in a single night. Cologne devastated. The RAF and the Americans developing terrible new techniques. Carpet bombing, firestorms, the systematic destruction of entire city centers. But those were industrial cities, the propaganda explained. Regrettable, but they were far from Berlin. The capital remained safe. Protected. The heart of the Reich could not be touched. The largest tank battle in history, and Germany lost. The Wehrmacht began its long, grinding retreat across the eastern territories. The news broadcast stopped mentioning city names. The maps disappeared from the newspapers entirely. 1944. Rome fell in June. The Allies landed in Normandy, a temporary incursion, the radio said, to be driven back into the sea. By August, Paris was liberated. By September, Allied forces were on the German border. And through it all, Berlin remained untouched. Scarred, yes. Bombed occasionally, certainly. But never like Hamburg. Never with the full weight of Allied air power. The city survived, and its survival felt like proof that some core truth remained, that Germany still possessed some special providence. Until tonight. Margaret turns to look at her apartment building. The windows are all blown out. The roof has collapsed on the eastern side. But it stands more or less. They have a home to return to, which is more than the Mullers can say. More than thousands of other Berliners can say tonight. She hears new sirens now, fire brigades, ambulances, the sounds of emergency response. Voices echo across the ruined cityscape, calling names, searching for survivors. Somewhere close, someone is screaming, a high, sustained note of agony or madness. What do we do? Anna asks. Her voice sounds very young, very small. What do they do? Margaret has no answer. Return to the apartment? Try to salvage what they can? Wait for another raid? Because there will be another raid, she knows that now with absolute certainty. Tonight was not an aberration. Tonight was the new reality. Herbecker picks up his clipboard from the rubble, brushes the dust from it with mechanical precision. His hands are still shaking. We endure, he says, but the words sound hollow. We do our duty. Duty to what? Margaret wants to ask. To a regime that promised victory and delivered catastrophe? To a Führer who declared Germany would rule for 1,000 years while the Reich crumbles in the fifth? She doesn't say it. None of them do. The walls still have ears, even walls blown open to the night sky. There are still Gestapo, still informers, still consequences for defeatist talk. But she doesn't have to say it. She can see it in every face around her, the same realization, the same hollow understanding. They've lost. The war is over, even if the dying continues. Even if Klaus is still out there somewhere, fighting for a future that no longer exists. Above them, the fires burn on, turning night into day, cremating the last illusions of the thousand-year Reich. By the time real dawn arrives, Margaret and Anna have salvaged what they can from the apartment. It isn't much. 2 suitcases filled with clothes, blankets, the photograph album, Anna's schoolbooks, a single pot and pan. The ceiling in their bedroom has partially collapsed, covering everything in plaster and splintered wood. The kitchen window frames are twisted, the glass ground to powder across the floor. But the apartment is structurally sound, or sound enough. They can stay if they choose to. If there's any point in staying. Margaret stands at the empty window frame, looking out over Berlin as the sun rises behind the smoke. The city she's known her entire life, 52 years of memories of walking these streets, of watching them transform from imperial boulevards to Weimar's electric modernity to Nazi monumentalism, is barely recognizable. Whole blocks are simply gone. Where the Adler department store stood yesterday, there is now a mountain of rubble still sending up lazy spirals of smoke. The State Opera House, she can see it from here or could, has been gutted by fire, just a shell of blackened walls. The streets are carpeted in debris, bricks, glass, twisted metal, things she can't and doesn't want to identify. Ash falls like snow, coating everything in fine gray powder. And the bodies. She can see them even from here. Forms covered with blankets or coats, lined up along the sidewalk on Skanhauser Alley. A civil defense crew is moving among them, checking identification papers, making lists. By afternoon there will be mass graves. There are too many dead for individual funerals. Too many for the morgues. Too many for anything except expedient disposal. How many do you think? Anna asks from behind her. Her daughter has been silent for hours, helping to salvage their belongings with mechanical efficiency. Thousands, Margaret says. Then more honestly, I don't know. Too many. The official number, when it's finally released 3 days later, will claim 870 dead. The real number, the one people whisper about, the one that accounts for the uncounted bodies still buried in collapsed shelters, the ones vaporized by direct hits, the ones that burned to ash in the firestorms, is probably 3 or 4 times that. Maybe more. But numbers don't capture it. Numbers don't convey what it means for a city of 4 million to realize in a single night that everything they believed about their safety, their superiority, their destiny, was a fiction. Footsteps on the stairs. Margaret turns to see her Becker in the doorway, his party pin conspicuously absent from his lapel. His face is gray, the lines deeper than they were yesterday. He looks like he's aged a decade in a single night. There's a distribution center for emergency rations at the school on Knockstrasse, he says. And they're organizing work crews for rubble clearing. They're asking for volunteers. Are people volunteering? Margaret asks. Herbecker's laugh is bitter, brittle. What choice do they have? He leaves without waiting for a response. Margaret watches him descend the damaged stairs, moving like a man walking to his own execution. Anna comes to stand beside her at the window. Together they watch the city begin its stunned attempt at recovery. Fire brigades are still fighting blazes. The Volkssturm, the home guard of old men and boys, has been mobilized to clear streets, to dig for survivors, to collect the dead. There are no young men. They're all at the front. All dying for the Reich's final victory. Do you think Klaus is all right? Anna asks quietly. Margaret closes her eyes. She thinks of her son, 19 years old, fighting in Hungary against the Red Army. The newsreels don't show the Eastern Front anymore. They don't show much of anything except exhortations to have faith, to believe, to sacrifice more. I don't know, she says, because lying to Anna now feels obscene. I pray that he is. They're going to lose, aren't they? Germany. The war. We're going to lose. It's the first time either of them has said it aloud. The first time the truth has been given voice. Margaret should correct her, should warn her about defeatism, should remind her that walls have ears. But she can't. Not anymore. Yes, she says simply. We're going to lose. Anna nods, as if this confirms something she's known for a while but couldn't admit. What happens then? Margaret has no answer. She's heard the whispers, the rumors about what the Red Army does in occupied territories. She's heard the propaganda about Allied plans to destroy Germany entirely, to reduce it to an agrarian backwater. She doesn't know what's true and what's exaggeration. She doesn't know if it matters. We survive, she finally says. However we can. We survive. A Kübelwagen, a military vehicle, drives slowly down the ruined street below, loudspeakers crackling to life. The voice that emerges is tinny, distorted, but the message is clear. Asterisk citizens of Berlin. Remain calm. Continue your duties. The enemy's terror attack has failed to break our will. We stand united. We stand strong. Final victory will be ours. Asterisk. The words echo off the broken buildings, hollow and absurd. Final victory. Margaret almost laughs, but the sound dies in her throat. There's nothing funny about any of this. In the street, people pause in their salvage efforts to listen to the broadcast. Then they return to work, faces empty, movements mechanical. No one cheers. No one raises a fist in salute. They simply endure because endurance is all that remains. Mother, Anna says, her voice very quiet. I'm scared. Margaret pulls her daughter close, wraps both arms around her. Anna is 16 years old, still a child despite the uniform, despite the years of propaganda training, despite everything the regime has tried to make her into. I know, Margaret whispers. I am too. They stand together at the empty window frame, watching the sun burn through the smoke, watching Berlin try to resurrect itself from the rubble. The fires are mostly out now, reduced to smoldering patches that will burn for days. The all-clear hasn't sounded. Officially they're still in an air raid alert, still at risk. The bombers could return at any moment. Margaret thinks about the coming weeks, the coming months. There will be more raids, she knows this with absolute certainty. The Allies have demonstrated their capability and their intent. Berlin will burn again. And again. Until there's nothing left to burn. Until Germany surrenders or Germany dies. She thinks about Klaus, somewhere in Hungary, fighting for a cause that's already lost. She thinks about all the other mothers across Germany, across Europe, who are standing at windows this morning, surveying the damage, counting the cost, wondering how much more they can endure. She thinks about the promises made in 1933, the grand visions of a 1,000-year empire, of German greatness restored, of living space and racial destiny, and all the grandiose lies that brought them to this moment, standing in a gutted apartment, watching their world burn. What will you tell Klaus, Anna asks, when he comes home? If he comes home. That single word contains everything they've lost, everything they fear, everything they can't control. The truth, Margaret says. I'll tell him the truth. Below, the work crews continue their grim labor. The loudspeakers continue their hollow promises. The smoke continues to rise, carrying with it the ashes of the Reich's invincibility, dissipating into a gray November sky. By nightfall, the sirens will sound again. The bombers will return. Berlin will burn once more. And Margaret Schroeder and her daughter will descend back into the shelter, back into the darkness, to wait and see if they survive another night in the collapsing empire that promised them eternity and delivered only ruin. But for now, in this moment, as the weak sun breaks through the smoke and the city counts its dead, they stand together at the window. Mother and daughter. Survivors of the night when the illusion finally, irrevocably shattered. The night when Berlin learned what the rest of Germany would soon understand. The 1,000-year Reich would not last 1,000 years. It would not even last 12. The war isn't over. The dying will continue for 6 more months. But on this November morning in 1944, as the ash settles over the ruins of the capital, everyone in Berlin knows how it will end. They just don't know yet how many more will have to die before the inevitable becomes official.